space feels empty. A vast container where objects appear, move, and disappear. We imagine space as something that exists first, and matter as something that enters it later. Galaxies occupy space. Bodies move through space. Distance separates things. This idea is so natural that it rarely becomes a question. Physics quietly dismantles this picture. In classical thinking, space is a stage. It exists independently of what happens within it. Events unfold inside it, but space itself remains unchanged. This assumption shaped centuries of intuition. The universe looked like a box filled with moving pieces. Relativity breaks that box. Space is no longer passive. It bends. It stretches. It responds to energy and mass. Objects do not simply move through space. They participate in shaping it. What we experience as gravity is not a force acting across space, but a change in the geometry of space itself. This already suggests something important. Space is not a background. It is part of the interaction, but physics goes further. At quantum scales, space begins to lose its continuity. It can no longer be treated as smooth and infinitely different. The idea that you can always zoom in and find more space breaks down at very small scales. Space behaves less like a place and more like a structure. In some theories, space does not exist at all in a fundamental sense. It emerges from relationships between quantum systems. Distance is not something that exists independently. It is something that arises when systems interact in specific ways. This reverses intuition. Instead of objects existing in space, space may exist because of relationships between objects. What we call here and there may not be locations in a container, but expressions of how strongly systems are connected. In this view, separation is not primary. Relation is. Two particles can be far apart in space and still behave as a single system. Quantum entanglement ignores distance entirely. What matters is not where something is, but how it is related. Space becomes secondary to connection. This forces a reconsideration of locality. We assume that influence must travel through space step by step. Physics shows that correlation does not always respect spatial separation. Reality allows coordination without mediation through distance in the way classical intuition demands. Space stops being a barrier. It becomes a description. The universe begins to look less like a collection of things spread out and more like a network of interactions. Space is the way this network appears when relations stabilize. It is an emergent map, not the territory itself. At large scales, this map feels solid. Distances remain consistent. Objects appear separated, but this stability may be the result of. At deeper levels, the map dissolves into pure structure. Experience reflects this subtly. When attention turns inward, space loses its authority. Thoughts do not appear at a distance. Sensations are not located somewhere inside a container. Experience does not occur in space the way objects do. Space is something perceived, not something required for perception. The sense of here arises from orientation, not from location. Remove reference points, and space becomes ambiguous. In deep attention, the distinction between inside and outside softens. Space feels less like a place and more like openness. Physics points outward to the same conclusion. Space may not be where reality happens. It may be how reality organizes itself when relationships become stable. This changes the meaning of movement. Motion is no longer travel through a container. It is a change in relation. Something moves because its relationship to other systems changes. Position becomes contextual, not absolute. Time and space intertwine here. If space is relational and time is emergent, then the familiar universe is not built from fixed coordinates. It is built from correlations that persist long enough to look solid. This perspective removes nothing from daily life. Chairs remain where they are. Distances still matter, but it removes the assumption that space is fundamental. It becomes an approximation, useful, reliable, but not ultimate. The universe does not unfold in space. Space unfolds with the universe. This reframing is quiet but radical. It replaces the idea of an empty stage with the idea of structure without container. Reality becomes less about where things are and more about how they are related. Physics does not claim to know what lies beneath space. It only shows that space itself may not be the deepest layer. Beneath it lies something that does not resemble location at all. What remains when space dissolves? Relation, structure, interaction. Not emptiness, but connection without distance. When this is seen, the universe feels less vast and more intimate. Not smaller, but closer. Reality is no longer something spread out, far away. It is something happening through relation, right where interaction occurs. Space does not disappear. It reveals itself as surface. And beneath that surface, reality holds together in a way that does not require a place to exist. Still, within